Do you think since the opening of the Barclays Center that New York has become the Mecca of boxing again? Because there are a lot of fights going on. You have Matchroom doing shows at MSG, Top Rank at MSG, PBC at Barclays Center. Do you think New York is becoming that hub for boxing again?
I would like to say yes, but I don't believe it's at a moment. The big fights don't take place in New York City any longer, and there's a couple reasons for that, which we'll get to. But as far as New York City being the Mecca of boxing, it isn't. And yes, the Barclays Center has helped. It has also stimulated Madison Square Garden to get back into the boxing business. They gave up boxing a long time ago. They got rid of their boxing department, and they're used basically as a rental. So when the organizations come in and box at Madison Square Garden or do the MMA at Madison Square Garden, it's not the Garden any longer that's in charge. They're basically a landlord. The development of the Barclays Center has been tremendous. They have gotten into boxing, and they have certainly brought boxing back to New York. But no, boxing is not established in New York like it was at one time. The two arenas that you're talking about are big arenas. They put in some fights. Usually the promoters that come into that area bring their own stable of boxers with them. So it's not a development area for boxers in New York. If you go this Saturday to the Barclays Center to see a great heavyweight fight, very few of those boxers are local boxers. None of them are homegrown from New York. If you go next week to the Gardens fight with Triple G and the fellows over there, same thing. They're not New York fighters. New York was the Mecca of boxing when there were clubs and boxing arenas in all 5 boroughs, and there were fights in all 5 boroughs weekly or semi-weekly. One borough would fight another borough, and the fighters could come into a gym, train, and make a living as a boxer. Today, the boxers cannot make a living as a boxer. They're part-time boxers. Someone wins the Golden Gloves and he wants to come into a gym and develop himself and become a professional. He has to have a job. You know, he doesn't have a manager taking care of him, and there's not enough fights out there for him to support himself. So when New York City gets back to the place where fighters can support themselves in this as an industry, then I would say yes, boxing's back in New York, but it's not that way at the moment. The fighters that are supported are the ones that have established themselves as winners and with a potential to make money for someone else as well as themselves, but they're very few and far between. But the main reason, or one of the main reasons, why the big fights don't come into New York is money. It's much too expensive. And for example, if you want to put a big fight at Madison Square Garden, you have to rent the arena. The arena is extremely expensive. It's a turnkey operation. You have to go in there and pay an exorbitant amount of money to have it. There are a lot of unions that you're faced to work with. You don't have the concession, and all your fighters that you bring into New York, you have to put up in housing. Okay, housing in New York is extremely expensive. You have to give them a per diem, or you have to provide food for them. Food in New York is very expensive. The commission, which I think is one of the finest, if not the finest, in New York, is very strict. There's a lot of tests and a lot of medical situations that the fighters have to go through, which is good for the fighters. It's not so good for the promoters because it costs money. So the cost of doing a fight in New York is very high. If you take that same fight to a casino area, let's say Las Vegas, where they have a consortium of casinos that will pay you or pay the promoter to bring that event to their city, which then will bring the audience in for their gambling establishments. But they'll pay a site fee. So instead of you paying Madison Square Garden or the Barclays Center for the arena in essence is paying you to come to them. They will also provide you with all the food and all the housing at no charge. Of course, some sort of a contract, some sort of a deal is worked out. But it's much more lucrative to put the big fight in a place that's going to pay you rather than you having to pay out. Now, when you say, yeah, but they're multi-million dollars. If you have a Pacquiao, a Mayweather fight, and you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, what's this housing? It's a drop in a bucket. Well, that's true. However, the fighters don't want to put a multi-million-dollar deal on in New York any longer because of taxes. You know, if you fight in New York City, you have a New York City tax, you have a New York State tax, and you have a federal tax. You fight in Las Vegas, you have a federal tax, but you don't have a city tax, you don't have a state tax. So, you know, what is it? 3%, 4%, 5%, 10%? Well, 10% of $100,000, no big deal. 10% of 400 million is a big deal. So they're not going to give that to the government. So the big fights don't come into New York City any longer.